Welcome back, episode 2 of the Jazz Bros podcast. Today's guest is Todd Marcus. In this interview, you'll hear us talk about Todd's musical background, bass clarinet, Todd's work for a nonprofit called Intersection of Change, helping people in West Baltimore, and some of Todd's work as a leader. Todd, how did you get started on bass clarinet?
Bass clarinet, unusual instrument, kind of a different path than most, I suppose. I grew up playing the clarinet and was interested in jazz in high school and got turned away because I didn't play the saxophone. Band director said, you have to play the saxophone. And so it wasn't later on until I started exploring the music on my own and met a friend who gave me some records, and he gave me an Eric Dolphy record.
Who gave you these records?
A college friend.
Okay.
And so it was Outward Bound, Dolphy's record. I think it was one of his first, actually, with Freddie Hubbard. And they play Green Dolphin Street in addition to some of Dolphy's tunes. And that was the point where I heard bass clarinet. And at the time, everything I was doing on clarinet as a beginning improviser, it sounded like bad Dixieland and New Orleans style. And so I heard Dolphy using the bass clarinet. And to me, the instrument offered so much more possibilities as far as the tone and the textures. And that's when I went about getting a hold of one. And that was 1997. Went down to Chuck Levin's Music in Washington, D.C. Got a bass clarinet, and it's the same one that I play to this day.
So you got sort of more serious about music when you were in college? You weren't in school for music, though?
No, I was studying political science, but the college had a jazz band, and anyone was encouraged to participate. And so that was the first opportunity to really start getting involved, playing and hearing some of the standard jazz tunes, because they would have arrangements of them. And so that was the first steps of the process.
Okay, cool. And so you resisted the pressure to play saxophone that I've seen a lot of clarinet players. Why was that?
In the process of exploring what I was going to be able to do, I did get some saxophones at one point. It was probably a couple years later, as I had been trying to make the bass clarinet work as a main instrument in jazz. And what I found was there's challenges sonically. As you know, as a fellow bass clarinet player,
Yeah.
the instrument, it does not project like a saxophone.
Yeah.
It's a quieter orchestral type instrument. And so I was really encountering that when things got to be faster tempos and louder settings, it's hard to hear yourself. And I was working to put more and more air into the horn, but it was proven challenging. And so I started looking back to the example of Dolphy, and what I noticed was that when it gets faster and louder, Dolphy almost always goes to his alto. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to have to go that path as well, and I got a hold of a saxophone, but it just never really took. Some of it was probably my own impatience with not being able to immediately do the same things on the sax that I could on the clarinet, and so I didn't really pursue it aggressively, and I just kept on pushing with the bass clarinet, and more time went by and putting more effort in, and I kind of broke through that ceiling of what I think a lot of folks have previously done, and with limitations of the instrument, and been able to cultivate that ability to chart that new ground to be able to use it in a setting where you are playing faster tempos up against louder settings, and I feel good about that.
So what steps did you take? Was it equipment, practice? I mean, all of the above?
Yeah, I think all of the above. I think definitely on bass clarinet you really had to put a lot more air in, and so that meant going to more open mouthpieces, even doing some kind of MacGyver-like efforts where I was customizing mouthpieces. I experimented with building my own baffles in the mouthpieces, and that was getting creative and shaping with clay to try different shapes and then making it permanent with an epoxy. I bought the materials from Home Depot, and then shaped it myself. So that was something, and I think that gives me a little bit of a different tone, a little more of a cutting, driving kind of tone, which
Yeah.
helps a little bit. But yeah, just grinding on more and more air support, and look, it's never going to be as loud as a saxophone, but I've gotten to that point where I can play.
It's louder than some people's
Yeah.
saxophones.
Okay. Yeah. To be able to do it in that setting where I think most other folks, it's not something that they're able to do.
I've noticed when you're playing, you have developed a lot of chromatic stuff that crosses the break, like these really technical things that are
Hmm.
difficult on the instrument. You've kind of like attacked those things and like overcome them. What what kind of practicing did you do to get that kind of facility?
I think that I was good, especially earlier years, at really making sure that any different idea, a line, that I was playing through all keys.
Yeah.
And so that was just part of the practicing routine. And I remember part of that also was um, pretty early on, I put myself on a schedule, a rotation that I think it was like each week or my month was a different key focus. And so it would be rhythm changes in B major or F sharp or whatever. So, it was not only practicing those patterns throughout every key, but
You would
then
stay in.
applying them so that there wasn't that limitation that because of the break, I couldn't
Right.
navigate some of those things based on an awkward key.
So you would have like a key of the week,
Yeah,
like shed an A
yeah,
flat.
yeah. And I was recently in my basement and I came across the original case that I had for my horn, and I opened it up and I saw that I had a little piece of cardboard with each of the 12 keys, and there was a thumbtack, and that thumbtack was on whatever key of the week or key of the month it was. So I had forgotten that I had that system to ensure that I was covering every key.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've never thought of practicing like that. Um, yeah, that's great. The other thing I wanted to touch on before we get to some of the recordings is I know you do some work here, and we're in West Baltimore at Todd's house right now, the bass clarinet layer. You do some work here at a nonprofit, Intersection of Change. So I think right now that a lot of people are kind of talking about uh, social change. Some people are just like paying it lip service, but you're actually like out there doing it. So maybe you could talk about what it is you do.
Sure. The the other half of my life from the music has been my work for 20 years now here in West Baltimore. Our neighborhood is called Sandtown Winchester, and it butts up against the Upton community, really one big neighborhood to us. Right through the middle of it goes Pennsylvania Avenue, which historically in Baltimore was the arts avenue, the mecca for arts and entertainment in our community. And we're talking about during times of legal segregation, that was where the venues were, the clubs and the theaters and the shopping. And so our neighborhood is one that has suffered the effects of poverty over decades. And when I came to Baltimore years ago and I was going to school, I started volunteering. Every Saturday I would come to this neighborhood and I was volunteering with Sandtown Habitat for Humanity. And from that, I met a lot of folks, built a lot of relationships. And one was a lifelong community resident and his wife, Elder C.W. and Amelia Harris, that had been folks that had stayed here when so many others had left, and they had started a nonprofit, and that's Intersection of Change. And so I was really taken by that. Here I was studying the music that I was falling in love with, and Coltrane and Miles, and the music of the 50s and 60s, and so much of that is tied to social things that were taking place at that time and the
Yeah.
movements. And so a lot of that was tied also specifically to neighborhoods like where I live here. And so for me, it all folded together. And then as I was trying to figure out, at the time I was studying political science in college and thinking, well, where's that going to lead me career wise? And I didn't see that for myself. But I did feel strongly about being here and part of community, experiencing a sense of community that I had not experienced growing up in New Jersey, seeing it as an opportunity to really engage on race issues and feeling strongly that we have a lot of ongoing racism, and that this was an area and an opportunity for me to engage in that in a meaningful way. And so I moved into the neighborhood in 1997, and since that time, have been part of Intersection of Change, and we've done a lot of work reviving an area of our community where an intersection that was once abandoned and vacant, and we were able to transform all the buildings, reclaim all of them, turn open air drug market into just a beautiful um, revival part of our community where we have our different programs serving our neighborhood, and that's including a recovery program for our women overcoming drug addiction called Martha's Place, an arts program called Jubilee Arts, and more recently, a program called Strength to Love 2 that serves ex-offenders coming back from incarceration and runs an urban farm, so addressing food, desert issues, as well as employment opportunities.
Hmm. So you're originally from New Jersey, and then did you move to Baltimore in high school?
And coming down to college.
Okay, it was college.
Yeah.
Okay, and were you in school in the city?
Yeah, I was at Loyola, which
Oh,
is
okay, yeah.
right here in the city, and that was the connection point to come on Saturdays down to my neighborhood here.
Okay. And just for people who are maybe a little more unfamiliar with Baltimore, or maybe only slightly familiar with Baltimore, like me, we're just west of MLK, right?
Yeah, we're kind of northwest, and so we're fairly due west of the heart of the city, the Mount Vernon
Mount
area,
Vernon, yeah.
and for folks that are not from Baltimore but maybe followed the civil unrest that we had last April, which was 2015.
Right.
Folks were seeing a lot of the activity. It was along Pennsylvania Avenue, and there was an iconic intersection of Pennsylvania Avenue and North Avenue where, unfortunately, a CVS had been looted and set on fire, and so that became kind of ground zero for a lot of the national coverage of our community, and of course, press, as it's prone to do, cover the negative aspects.
Yeah.
But for folks that followed a little more deeply, they saw a lot of the positive protests and demonstrations with people coming together and musicians gathering. And so that's really, that kind of geographically puts you in a context of where we are here in Baltimore.
Yeah, so North Avenue runs east-west,
Mm-hmm.
Pennsylvania goes north-south, and where that CVS was is a little northwest of here, right?
Yeah, from my house, it's a little bit northeast.
Northeast,
Yeah,
okay.
but just about a half mile from my house here.
Right. And,
And I'll throw in too that one of the triggers that caused the explosion of the unrest was the death of Freddie Gray,
right.
who was in police custody that same year and died. And so the answers we have not gotten the answers as
Exactly
definitive
what happened.
as to what caused
Yeah.
it, but it's been one of the theories has been what they call a rough ride, where in the police van the person is not strapped in properly and the driver starts going back and forth, and that caused the damage. Regardless of what the cause was, it is reflective of what is a very real reality in our neighborhood, which is harsher policing tactics. And so that, of course, touched a very real nerve in our city, in our community.
Yeah.
And like I say, Freddie Gray was here, a resident of our neighborhood, lived a couple blocks over
Okay.
on Gilmore Street. So, those are more context of where we are here in Baltimore and how some of that stuff ties in to things that are happening in our neighborhood, some of the dynamics, and of course, those are things that affect me as a community resident and as a musician.
Right, yeah. So, with your work, are you involved in one particular aspect of the nonprofit, or just all three separate programs equally, or?
Yeah, all of them. I mean, my role when we started years ago was the construction manager, as we did renovations of our buildings and fundraising, and but over the years, I guess it's 10 years now that I've been the executive director of the organization. So my responsibility is overseeing our overall efforts, so all of those, supervising all those programs, working with our staff of each of those. We still have the task of doing the fundraising and the relationship building. So it's a lot of work, and we're small. We're still relatively small as far as our staff, but we do a lot with little. And if anyone wants to check out intersectionofchange.org, you can see details on each of our programs, as well as some great before and after pictures, so you can really see what our area looked like before and after our work. Because there's been this huge physical transformation in addition to the programs that are serving our community.
Right. And how does the arts section of it work? Is that mostly for children or?
That's actually evolved. It certainly involves art classes for our kids, ages 6 and up, all the way up really to senior citizens.
Okay.
And so there are art classes in visual arts, in dance, in ceramics. We've done a ton of murals, over 24 community murals. But I think one of the other important things is that, especially when we focus on our teenagers, is that we call it our youth and business class. And I know you appreciate this. For us as artists, the reality is that nowadays, being an artist, and I mean not just today, but heightened more so these days, you really are an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
An independent entrepreneur.
I agree.
And so for us, there's that relevant that through art, we're teaching our teenagers how art offers that ability to look at a project, source your materials, put a budget together, promote it, sell it, and so all these aspects are a part of it. And I think that's one of the really interesting aspects of what our Jubilee Arts program is doing.
Yeah. And last time I saw you play over at Single Carrot Theater, you had some new songs you'd been writing about living here in the neighborhood. It seemed to me trying to give people more of a perspective of what it's actually like than maybe like the snapshot people might see on the news might be a little deceptive.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good way to put it, that for folks that are not familiar with our neighborhood or a neighborhood like ours across our country, they see the negative stuff, the things that they see when they turn on the news or read the papers. And it is all this, it just reinforces the negative stereotypes that people have of a community like ours.
Right.
But for me, 20 years of living here, I know the realities of the positives.
Right.
The sense of community that I experienced here, that growing up in northern New Jersey in the suburbs, I never had a sense of community like that here. The degree of knowing your neighbors and relationships within the community, I think that's a very important thing. Some of the history of our neighborhood, whether it's the social, political aspects or the arts aspects, and then just some of the realities like, at nighttime it still gets quiet and it's peaceful and you hear the train going through the city and, so all these different things for me with the new music that I've written has been a chance to capture that in addition to some of the challenges, and I think by presenting it as kind of a suite of music, it's an opportunity to talk about that with a general public audience and put that more into the consciousness and hopefully open some eyes and
the
give
different
people some consideration.
aspects of living somewhere, just like anywhere else, there's like good and bad. Yeah. So we got some music to listen to. that tune we just heard, what was the name of it?
It's called The Adventures of Kang and Kodos.
So, some explanation on that?
For the Simpsons fans out there, they'll remember Kang and Kodos are the two characters that make their appearance every year on the Simpsons Halloween episode. They're the aliens. They got one eye and a dome covering them. They're from outer space, and early in the Simpsons years, they made appearances, and then it's kind of just goofy, funny characters that pop up every year on the Halloween show.
Okay. Yeah.
So just I think a little bit tapping into some of the more lighthearted, humorous part of my personality and
Yeah.
and love for goofy things like that and sci-fi and all kind of things.
Cool. And so the band was, of course, Todd Marcus, bass clarinet, George Colligan on piano, and then
And then you have Eric Wheeler on bass and Warren Wolf on drums.
interesting. Wow, I didn't know that was Warren on drums. So like we were talking earlier about bass clarinet projecting in these settings, more intense, high volume, high speed.
Mm-hmm.
You were saying you think that's a good example of that. Any more comments on like basically how?
That is off my album, a 2012 album called Inheritance. And that's the leading track. And I think I programmed that intentionally because I wanted to show from the start the ability that I've charted to present the instrument in that way. And I think typically the instrument gets used for more textural kind of things, brooding, kind of moody stuff, and that's its natural strength. In larger ensembles, it gets picked up as a double. The saxophone players pick that and the flute
Right.
up, and for
Yep.
the warmer things. But I wanted to show the work that I've done to be able to present it in this kind of higher octane setting as well. And I think that piece is a good example of that.
And when you recorded it, what did you use two microphones? I like to use two, and I know a lot of other people.
Yeah, it's usually recommended. I recorded at Skyline Studios in New Jersey by a great engineer, Paul Wycliffe.
Yeah, he did my record too.
Oh, good. Yeah, he's a great guy
Yeah.
and a master of his craft. And he actually, the last few times I've been up there, he has used just one microphone and kind of put it in the middle, and it does a beautiful job.
And you're isolated, obviously.
Yeah, same room, myself and the piano.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but the piano has a little wall in front of it and covering over top of it.
Okay. And is it like further off the horn then, if it's one microphone? I know when he did Gary's thing at the Hopkins Club with me, it was one mic, and I was surprised because, like, usually if it's one mic, I'm usually sacrificing in one register, but somehow he positioned it right. Or
Yeah, again, that's his area of expertise, and so I have absolute faith in him. And I know, though, to your point, that usually the recommendation is that clarinets and bass clarinets get two microphones, and even if you like, I have a wireless microphone, an AMT one that I use, and it's built to clip on to the bell. But it's also advised that you get a second one that clips onto the middle of the horn, so that it's covering the full range of the instrument. So I don't know if it's because Paul's got a fancy microphone or
yeah.
whatever, but yeah, he's an expert. He knows what he's doing, and I'm glad that you had the same experience coming away feeling like
yeah.
he hit that sweet spot. And that's his term. He said he's always looking for the sweet spot on the bass clarinet, and he found it.
Yeah. So what's the name of the next track you're gonna play?
The next track is a sample of some of my larger ensemble work. One of the things that I've done for many years is a nonet of six horns, piano, bass, and drums. I call it my Todd Marcus Jazz Orchestra, and it focuses on my larger ensemble writing and just the different textures and kind of style of writing where you can have a larger exposition with more horns and that kind of musical storytelling. And so this is a tune off of my album Blues for Tahrir, which was 2015 release. This is also the opening selection, and it's got a little intro that features just the horns until it goes into the full body of it, and it just goes through many movements, many cycles. And so That is part of the reason why it's called Many Moons, as well as by it being a more complicated tune or more involved. As I was composing it, it took a period of time, and I was struggling at some points to figure it out. And usually I sit at the piano and compose, but what I did a lot was go out for my bike ride and try to hear in my head how some of these different sections would connect. And since it was over a period of many months, I would often be looking up the moon, and so I went through the cycle of many moons to put all this composition together.
Cool. Well, let's check it out. So the first thing I wanted to ask you about that was there like a specific um what like musical influences did you have for that?
I think the one right from the beginning intro shows some of the inspiration I've taken over the years from the work of a great composer and a flautist named Jamie Baum, who's based up in New York and has a septet whose writing I just really enjoyed and admired for years. And she's got a couple pieces that have some of that more open harmony, very rich harmony. A little bit of that also. I take influence from some of Terence Blanchard's writing as well in that introduction. Um, but yeah, then after that, it really just is what often is the case for me of taking different fragments sometimes and using them as a starting point and seeing how that can evolve together and um, even more and more these days taking different fragments and then seeing how they can be assembled together in a bit of a collage to make something that's a unified piece and that's what I think was some of what's going on in that one there.
Yeah. And before what how about the band? It's Brent Burkhead,
Brent Burkhead on
Russell
flute
Kirk.
and alto, Russell Kirk on alto saxophone, Greg Tardy on tenor saxophone, myself on bass clarinet, and those are the four reeds. And then for brass, you have Alex Norris on trumpet, Alan Ferb on trombone, and then you have Xavier Davis on piano, Jeff Reed on bass, and Eric Kennedy on drums.
There we go. Anything else you want to say about that recording? How many moons did it take?
Yeah, that's a good question. It took a while. It took a while. But I actually, it's a piece that I'm fond of, and I think that it captures a lot of different things that I've over the years have been developing parts of my writing and approach, and yeah, I like that one. I do.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of writing in there.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Any closing comments before we wrap it up here?
I guess the only thing that we didn't talk about that has been an important part of my work has been incorporating Middle Eastern influences into my music. And I know we didn't play samples that feature that, but if folks want to check out toddmarcusjazz.com, they can certainly see a lot of my writing that has done that. And that stems from my heritage. My dad was Egyptian, and so growing up, we didn't have more Middle Eastern culture at home, and it was actually years after he immigrated from Egypt before he actually went back, and that we went back as a family. Um, so it was really, for me as a musician, one of the ways in more recent years that I've kind of connected with that part of my culture and heritage has been through music. And I found that I really like the way Middle Eastern music is um, composed and organized. A lot of times you have these long extended works. They're very kind of romantic and they're different movements and things that I found really, really merged well with how I've been approaching my composition and writing. And so a lot of my work has worked to incorporate Middle Eastern influences into my writing as well.
Cool. Yeah, and obviously the title of that record is Blues for Tahrir, so that's referencing the
That's for Tahrir Square in Cairo, Egypt, where starting in 2011, the Egypt's Arab Spring movement was focused in Tahrir Square, and that's where you hear the protests, the demonstrations. I began by writing one piece that I thought they would be just kind of about that, and then that would be it. But then as the movement kept going on for a period of a few years, I started writing different movements. One that was kind of a reflective movement, one a protest movement, a couple others, and so it ended up being a similar to what we were talking about earlier with some of the community uh, music that I've written of this past year. I was trying to show the different phases and different aspects of a situation, and music allows us to do that.
right. Yeah. Great. So anything you want to plug here? Todd Marcus hosts a jam session every Wednesday at Home Slice.
Now, jazz community service, keeping a jam session alive. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's important. This music very much has a social component to it, a community component to it, and so that's one of the reasons that even now I still keep that going and alive. But I would encourage folks that want to learn more about my work to check out toddmarcusjazz.com and I keep my calendar up to date. And happy to be here we are, January of 2017 now, and happy to share that I'll be getting to play a little bit with you in a couple weeks
Right.
down in DC as well.
February 1st.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're playing at Twins. Me on piano, Todd on bass clarinet. And you got any other hits with your band in the works? Or
I do. One of the things, it'll be recording this new quintet music that I've written, and hopefully that'll be earlier to mid this year. But got a bunch of dates in Baltimore, DC, New York, some stuff in New England. Will be my first time doing some touring up through there. So between now and August, a lot of those dates are coming up. So the best thing is the calendar to check out the location.
Go to your
website. Yeah.
Okay, great. So episode 2 in the books. Thanks, Todd, for coming on here.
Good to be a part of it. And for you as a folks, know you as a saxophone player. You just mentioned your piano playing, but it's special that I'm being here in the same room with a fellow bass clarinet player as well. And
it's rare.
You asked me about plugs. I'm going to turn the tables on you a little bit. I remember the first time I met you, probably back in 2009 or so, and you were coming to Baltimore area with one of Baltimore's great musicians, Charlie Sigler, a guitarist. Yeah. And I was playing a gig at the Cat's Eye in Fells Point neighborhood at that time.
I remember that, yeah.
And you came and sat in, and we were playing the Mingus tune, Reincarnation of a Lovebird, I think it's called. And, it's a tricky little tune. I think it's in E major. And I think you guys were both in college at the time.
Freshman at William Patterson.
Freshman?
Yeah.
Damn. And here comes Nathan Hook, freshman, playing his ass off on this tricky tune and his unusual key. And so, yeah, it's been fun that from that point and the years going forward, seeing you just keep pushing hard on your craft and knowing that you have that love for the bass clarinet and doing an album with Gary Thomas just recently, in addition to your own work. So it's a lot of fun to talk together today with a friend and colleague here.
Yeah, we can talk about equipment.
Bass clarinet power, as I like to say.
There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So that's it for today. So there you have it. I'll have links to all of Todd's albums, social media, website, stuff like that in the description box. And some upcoming things for myself. February 1st, I will be at Twins with Todd. I'll be on piano, Todd on bass clarinet, Chris Monson on bass, and Gustin Rudolph on drums. After that, February 6th, I'm playing with my trio at On D Music, hosting the jam session there. And then February 8th in Beacon, New York, I'm bringing the band that recorded my album, Progressive Overload, to Beacon, New York. We're playing at Quinn's. So that band is myself on saxophone, Billy Test on piano, Travis Reuter on guitar, Louis Demule on bass, and Paolo Cantarella on drums. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you back here for episode 3.